Hi, thanks for tuning in to our Practical Nerds weekly podcast. I'm Shubh, and together with my partner and co host Patrick, we normally invest in founders in design, construction, renovation, and logistics technology. Many of our friends in the ecosystem wanted us to start a podcast on the built world, and in return, we decided to honor their request with a show about nothing at all. Hey, Patrick, I was recently told that we shouldn't actually be having an intro which says that the show is about nothing at all. So, my question to you is, do you think the show is about anything at all?
I doubt it because my amount of preparation for today's episode was literally 60 seconds with you,
Yeah.
and which means that you can look forward to all the reasons that we have seen why construction tech companies have failed over the years with no preparation at all. If you want it unfiltered, here you go.
Yeah. I guess let's not waste any more time. Let's dive immediately right into it.
Okay, so the topic is why construction tech companies have failed. And I guess in the end, we will never have a complete set. It will never be what they call MISI. And that's why we're not even aiming to be exhaustive with the following list of reasons. Perhaps we do it more on a case-by-case or anecdotal basis. Shub, why don't you kick us off with one reason why you have seen construction tech founders fail within this industry?
So, I guess where I would like to start is in some ways like a philosophical continuation of the episode we did on category creators. And I think we had a similar episode as well. I'm not able to remember what we titled that one as well. But broadly along the lines of, hey, if you, or let's say if for those of you who follow AEC VC, if you go the in the obvious and hidden frameworks, it's more of the yeah. So if you're ending up chasing the obvious but hidden opportunities, and what that means is obvious but hidden, right? Am I right, Patrick?
Yeah, you're right.
The category creators are hidden but obvious, but the so-called, opportunities which generalists quite often chase, or people think it's the next hot space. It's usually obvious but hidden, as we call it. If you'd like to learn more, do check out some of our past episodes. And I think quite often what ends up happening in these kinds of opportunities when founders start is there's an oversimplification of why either some other model or a category creator that has worked in a certain form, in a certain geography, in an oversimplified way, if it's applied to start in construction in a context that might not be super relevant. But nevertheless, because of the context around it, it is seen as a hot space, and therefore you just dive right in
Right.
without enough evidence of market fit, market validation. And I think that it's a very tricky one to point out as a reason they fail, because it doesn't often resemble a failure in the beginning, which is what makes it challenging. In fact, it's the mirror image of the category creator. So again, please do check out our episode on category creators. In the sense, it will resemble a business which VCs love, people want to join you, you'll get lots of conversations easily, but for whatever reason, traction takes a little bit longer. You're not quite able to nail the unit economics, which makes sense at an equilibrium state, etc. Which is a fascinating state to find yourself in. But I find that usually those kinds of companies, the writing's kind of on the wall, but they don't look like failures in the beginning.
But look, I mean, what you're describing is, I think, bang on. I would just use different words to say, or perhaps to abstract it to like the underlying mentality failure behind it. If you treat venture as a narrative game and not a game to build a business, then you will tend to think that the customer you need to convince is an investor. And once you have adopted that mentality, you will land in the framework that you're referencing, our hidden but obvious or hidden in spite of obvious framework. You will tend to land where you're obvious to an investor. But the best source of cash is always your customer. I cannot say this often enough. The best source of cash is a customer, not your investor, which means that you should want to be obvious to the customer, not to the investor. And so that means that in the framework that you're referencing, which we've published, you want to be obvious to them, and it's completely cool to not be obvious to the investors. In fact, it's oftentimes an advantage because then you land in the quadrant where you can actually build hidden away from category clones, hidden away from a lot of new age competition, etc. So the underlying reason that can cause this is actually that you're treating your company and your path as a narrative that you need to keep selling and appealing to investors, when really your mentality should be, hey, I want to be building a business and I want to appeal to my customers. It's when we say these things, anyone who is not from venture who would listen to this would stop listening right now, because they're like, what kind of obvious bullshit are these two clowns talking about? Well, unfortunately, it's not obvious, it's not evident, it's not repeatedly used in the venture ecosystem. The venture ecosystem is doing the counterintuitive thing way too often, is appealing to investors, appealing to a narrative, and not appealing to the customers, which they should. So I think that's an underlying reason, really.
Agreed. What would be the next reason construction tech startups fail, Patrick?
So in 2021, we published a long piece of an outside-in analysis of why we felt, what were reasons why Katerra failed. And so we had a little bit of insight into Katerra, but I cannot claim I knew all the details. Nevertheless, I did take a relatively opinionated stance on a few things that just structurally were never going to work. And for which I didn't even need any inside knowledge beyond the little data points that I did have. And one of them was what I called the Icarus problem. And that was very prevalent in construction tech in the first, in fundamental time, 2019 to 2021, 2022. I think it predated 2019, though, was a lack of humility. You did get a lot of contact founders that felt like, hey, here's this antiquated industry that is refusing to adopt technology, but technology is so great and the processes are so undigital. And hey, look, here's this study that tells that only fishing is dumber than construction. Like how often have we been cited this industry?
All the time. Yeah.
And just imagine whatever we got to see in that case, the customers got to see 100 times more often. Right.
Yeah.
And so here come these super smart founders from university, this and that, and Ivy League and California Ivy League and whatever. And now they're really going to show me what I have been doing wrong all these 70 years. Right. And so that is one of the core reasons why a lot of these companies actually did not find success in adoption, is just because the attitude with which they went to customers was not appreciated, and it prevented them to do something that I absolutely love in founders, which is continuous discovery and fast discovery. I think discovery unlocks so much for your business in terms of the optionality. Because in the early years, with discovery, what I can build into my business is discover the next big thing that I should build, or discover a feature, or discover an angle about my product and the distribution and how I deliver it. That only comes with discovery. It doesn't come with me closing my mind and trying to evangelize someone who has been running for 30 years a profitable business why they have been doing it the wrong way. All the while, by the way, I'm burning money. So I'm educating someone who's doing a highly complex project business profitably while I am burning money, right? So that really didn't sit well with a lot of customers. And if you ask back to people who have been around in that time frame like us, that was something that happened a lot. But I'm not sure that happened as often in the Eastern markets.
I would tend to agree with you. Although, mind you, there could be several explanations for it. In a sense, maybe, venture, especially in AEC, hadn't percolated to the Eastern markets as much in those times. Which actually brings me to a related question I had for what you said. So you mentioned we saw a lot of that maybe more in Western markets, perhaps in particular in the US, up until 2021, maybe 2022. Were you implying that perhaps you're not seeing as much of it these days?
I think it's gotten better. I really
Mm.
do. In the markets that I cover, and I speak regularly also with our third partner, not on the call here, Adam, who covers North America for us, it does feel different. It
Hmm.
feels like there's a higher level of maturity of founders that has moved into the sector. And I do think, personal observation, it has to do that the quality of founders that is coming into the sector is gradually increasing all the time. And with that,
Mm.
quality does correlate in our sectors, by my observation, with maturity.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely.
So, and I think why I mentioned this in the case of Katera. So Katera had this very loud organ, where they
Hmm.
felt like, I mean, I can only imagine what it was like to customers or suppliers. I was never in the room when they talk to customers or suppliers, but I do have eyes and ears, and I do have people that tell me things. Just
Yeah.
judging from the outside, I mean, they were definitely evangelizing the market, and hey, here we are, and that's the Icarus problem, flying very close to the sun.
Yeah,
Could be that your wings are melting, and so
absolutely.
flip that around, and then I give the mic back to you. So the opposite of that, something that, again, I think I wish people had done more, and that
Hmm.
can lead to construction tech failure, is not using the competence of the industry enough. So
Hmm.
when you try to do too much in-house rather than build a collaborative approach with the stakeholders that are in the industry, where
Hmm.
everybody can feel like they can contribute the expertise that they've built up, or the network, or the track record, etc., that's a failure in many models. It's perhaps less relevant if you're building a point solution software, but it becomes very relevant once you move into outcomes, into transactions, think marketplaces, think outcome
Hmm.
as a service. There is competence in the industry that you can leverage, that you should leverage, because it has been built up over so many decades, and it has a trust associated with it.
Hmm. Absolutely. Maybe moving on to the next reason. So, one reason I thought of, which actually closely, I guess, operates in conjunction with what you said, is force feeding technology as like the key aspect, of force feeding a piece of technology or a technology that is hyped as being like a driver of a value proposition before it's actually has its rightful place in the market. Um, I think there's a whole bunch of solutions. I don't want to, particularly, call out any specific firm in particular. But I think, for example, there's a whole bunch of firms around modular construction with, who have force-fitted technology in a certain way and I think that specific kind of technology, for example, was showcased as being like the next big thing, etc., without any sort of proof point, but a whole lot of money went in and was not properly utilized. Uh, Not enough thought was given various times. And by the way, I fear to a lesser extent, but nevertheless fear, we may be seeing some of that right now in how
Oh,
AI applies to AEC, in the sense you kind of generically hail technology as the reason a business should be great, rather than how that technology enables a value proposition that exists on its own,
right.
if you know what I mean. Um, Look, we've spoken many times on Practical Nerds before that economies, industries evolve in certain ways, and I think AEC is also evolving in its own what perhaps is its natural cycle. And I think if you try too hard to force fit technologies which maybe you have gathered from other industries and try to force fit them into construction ahead of their time, what ends up happening is you have to burn enormous amounts of money just to show sort of like a cool looking product demo, which doesn't really help you make any real get real traction in the market. Uh, yeah, so if I have to give you like a TLDR version of it, focus more on the solution market fit rather than trying to be a cool tech demo company.
Right. It fits perfectly with what I was going to say next, so I can just build on your point.
Yeah.
founders thinking too much of they want to build a software business
Hmm.
rather than thinking they want to build a business.
Yeah.
And within construction tech, the two can be very disjunct from each other. In many other verticals, enterprise SaaS has been hailed as, rightly so, as one of the best models to capture value. But these are industries that have follow different dynamics, have different core attributes. They are not
Hmm.
project-based. They don't buy outcomes as much. They are not service-based for that reason. They don't operate against deadlines, against quality with very strong penalties. And all of that makes AECS an industry that absolutely loves track record and loves people who deliver outcomes and guarantee outcomes. So in this
Hmm.
industry, software is usually not the first model that I would recommend a founder to think about.
Yeah.
And it's quite dangerous if you're thinking, hey, I want to build a software business, let's do AECS, instead of
Hmm.
thinking, hey, I want to do a business.
Hmm.
And so that's a big mistake from a mentality perspective, is limiting yourself to SaaS too early without actually validating whether SaaS is the appropriate delivery model for the value. This,
Yeah.
can be a solution for the value that you want to be delivering into the sector. Meaning, you can actually nail the value, and you can absolutely be wrong about SaaS being the delivery mode.
Yeah. I mean, look, we have spoken before, if I'm not mistaken, on our episode about service as a product, that there are many other industries where white collar workers and the nature in which work is done is organized very differently, where the proportion of knowledge workers is considerably higher than what you see in construction, which is why the SaaS spend is therefore a very high share of the revenues or the costs in those
Right.
industries. For better or worse, that is not the actual representation of how construction is organized. Sure, if you go into architectural services, for example, knowledge workers do account for a greater share of their specific costs, although the software they use is quite different. If you're interested, check out all the episodes we've done on the design stack, etc. But coming back to what we're talking about here, so with the exception of some of those market participants, for the vast majority of people, as you rightly mentioned, they administer service of a very physical, on-site, blue-collar, material-based service,
Yeah.
ops-based service. So there's only, there's a literally a physical limit to the extent to which SaaS spend accounts for their share of OpEx. And therefore, you're limiting your market spend and therefore your ability to grow as a venture, if that's what you're structured as.
In fact, this week I have actually published my next AECVC, which is called the P&L of the construction industry. In it, I break down exactly what you're pointing out, is why, just giving you the tease here, but tune into AECVC, why materials and labor are a 50 times larger market to attack than the IT spend in construction, which is exactly
Yeah.
what you're saying. And so for me, that's a big mistake, just going default SaaS, and we have seen companies basically somewhere between go bust and not inflect as much as they could. But very rarely, I invite everyone to do their own diligence and research here. Very rarely do you see in construction tech actually enterprise SaaS companies become very large. And if
Yeah.
they do, they are also oftentimes companies that are older than 10 years.
Yeah, I think in all likelihood, had you not added this caveat, people will tell you, hey, look at Procore, look at safety culture, etc. Those are all great companies, but yes, the caveats also apply. Yeah.
And so that brings me to my next gripe over founder mistakes. The biggest founder mistake the founder mistake that I am the most annoyed by
Hmm.
is when founders listen to generic investors on their board, give them generic advice about distributions, pricing models, and product. That annoys the hell out of me because I have seen too many examples where it was actually detrimental advice to what we discussed, like can VCs actually be harmful? They
Yeah.
absolutely can. So I did reference an example of a software company whose board I share with a generic investor. I will not go back into that one, but basically the advice was, hey, tune up the marketing spend, completely wrong, while my advice was order pizza to the site, go offline, go less remote on the sales, go more on site, go through the associations, throw parties, all of these things that give you human touch points and maximize the human touch points, while this generic investor came from a logic of any other generic vertical where they needed to minimize touch points and they could just ramp up the marketing spend. Didn't work in construction. My way worked. Now they have switched. The other example, so there is a blue collar labor. It's a mix between marketplace and edtech, which has been hugely successful to a certain scale. And initially they sold as a service, which gave them great scale, great margins, was net profitable early. And then the generic investors got involved. And then one famous US generic investor invested, sent a junior investor with all the logos, blah, 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 on the board. And you know what this generic investor coming from this brand name did? Well, the first thing is he told them, hey, you need to become an enterprise SaaS. The business was doing absolutely great up until then. Again, net profitable, great margins, services, etc. But the junior investor said, well, but that way we are not going to get the multiple. So let's try to sell enterprise SaaS. Well, to a degree it worked, but they lost a lot of time and resources and manpower to do that. And ultimately they settled for, well, we can do something in this industry that is, again, an outcome industry, because I wanted to hire the people.
Yeah.
Something akin to SaaS if we sell tokens. So basically, we're still selling the outcome. We're just pre-charging for it. That's actually it's a cool model. I'm not sure that's something that you needed to spend all the time and money for that this generic investor did. Fine, I was able to live with that. But then the same guy said, "Oh, now let's build a social network."
Oh, nice.
And I mean, literally, like my face was not understanding what was going on. 2 years later, next investor comes in, an investor who's a friend of mine. I had discussions with him. I told him, this doesn't make sense. This investor came in and basically advised the firm to shuttle that and go back to the roots, do what you do best, and keep growing that, which I was very grateful for. But again, the point is, brand name, junior employed investor, generic advice, shit advice. So founders, seriously. The best thing I can tell you is do not listen to a junior employed investor from a generic investment firm. It's an absolutely abstractable advice that you should follow.
Yeah, and if you want more juicy takes on the gripes we have from generic investors or on generic investors, check out, was it the most recent episode, Patrick, or the one before we did on generic investors get wrong about AEC tech startups?
Yeah, I'm just checking it out. It was the previous one, number 36.
Gotcha. Okay. So definitely check that one out.
Yeah.
I think we go through that alone will probably give you a few reasons and scenarios which will lead to failure of construction tech startups.
Yeah. Which, by the way, it comes with maturity. A mature person will never listen to only a single person. They, collect your information and in the end, make up your own mind.
Yeah. Another thing I would say is there are certain kinds of businesses in construction which take some time to blossom and to show what the business or the product is capable of. So I'm thinking, for example, technologies which replace other pieces of software in the AEC design stack, for example. Sometimes it may be a marketplace for an altogether new category. Sometimes it could be even a services business. And I think what I've seen with quite a few founders is either an insufficient understanding or an insufficient appreciation for the time it takes either for the product development cycle, given the complexities involved, or for the time it takes to actually, as you referenced, build the track record, etc. There's this feeling of constant hurry that, hey, we need to get going. We need to show, these so and so targets or these milestones, which maybe a generic investor has told them, or maybe they've heard from someone else that this is what they need to demonstrate. And there is a risk that it creates that you kind of mess things up because you're in such a hurry, either because you don't know or you don't want to respect the natural rate at which these companies uh, develop into their best form.
I mean, a sense of urgency is a fantastic founder trait, but I'm with you. Sometimes the sense of urgency gets blown into the wrong proportions, and I've seen it happen more often than not actually when I'm in a highly competitive market. So
Hmm.
actually picking a highly competitive market can already be the mistake in and of itself, but I wouldn't generalize it to that degree, because sometimes picking a competitive market and doing something just substantially cheaper while everybody is fighting, you do something completely different, can be a great choice.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say the mistake is going into a competitive market, but the mistake is letting the aspect of competition amplify this hurry or this sense of urgency that you have, because it blows it out of proportions, and then it creates so much more volatility in your decision making.
Hmm.
It makes you so much more likely to base your prioritization decisions and your resource allocation decisions on very short-term data. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So,
I
oh,
do.
my competitor has just done this, ergo I should just do that. And all of a
Hmm.
sudden, you're in a way too short of a cycle to be building a substantial business. It's best seen in distribution. So assume you have product market fit, but you don't have distribution market fit
Hmm.
yet, right? So at that point, typically you will have raised several $1 million, can 10 million and above. And your investors will be like, hey, like that's, like exactly the example of the person, that I lost respect for is like, let's crank up the marketing and let's go at it, right? So let's
Yeah.
prove that. And so now when you bring competition into the mix, and so every 2 weeks, people will then say, hey, but these guys are now paying this per click. And these guys have just ramped up this partnership. And then you will increase the marketing pump even
Hmm.
more. And actually, the viability of that motion will not increase. It could actually decrease. And so
Yeah.
you're bringing yourself into this cycle of continuously worse decision making.
Hmm. Indeed.
So
Indeed.
distribution is in fact another, I think, mistake that I see construction tech founders doing. I keep saying people are obsessed with product, and in fact, when you look over LinkedIn and Substack and you know the site formerly known as Twitter, it's almost founders feel like when they call themselves a product founder, it's they treat it as this badge of honor.
Hmm.
I actually get more excited by founders that are distribution founders, people
Hmm.
that treat a product as the enabler and the reason to exist, the raison d'être,
Yeah.
but the distribution is what makes you truly a generational company, and that propels the product and the value proposition wrapped into your product into the stratosphere. And just it's unbelievable how few people, how few founders in construction tech actually truly think about the distribution motion. It's like if you're a founder and you hear this, ask yourself, how much time have you spent thinking about refining your distribution motion in the last 4 weeks?
Hmm. Yeah.
Do you get that a lot?
In the sense, do enough founders ask me about how they could improve their distribution motion?
Yeah, or you see them perfecting it.
No, okay, perfecting that bar is quite high. Uh, it actually takes a lot longer than most people realize. And you're right, it typically happens quite a bit later than product market fit.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Um, what is it that the industry is teaching them that is distracting from perfecting distribution and instead thinking about other things?
So look, my hypothesis is when you talk about distribution as being one of the things you're doing well, you come across as a traditional corporate or a traditional supply chain company, or maybe even like an FMCG company, something of that sort. If you see yourself as a tech company, as a tech founder, distribution is normally, or it is unfortunately not perceived as a cool trait to have, that you have nailed distribution. It's seen as a trait of a more traditional company, which is sad. I think, in my opinion, it absolutely is extremely important for any company. I mean, uh, I was about to say Microsoft is the most valuable company because I'm not sure if it is or not. Maybe Nvidia is again, but I would say the very reason why Microsoft is or was the most valuable company in the world is completely because of its distribution.
That is interesting. I would love to ask your fellow. Sorry, he's from Hyderabad, right? Satya
That's right.
Nadella.
Yeah, yeah,
So your
exactly.
fellow Hyderabadi.
Hmm.
Hey, Satya, would you describe yourself on Twitter as a product founder or a distribution founder? I would be curious what his answer
Yeah,
would be.
I would be. I think he'll probably claim to be a product guy,
Yeah.
but then keep emphasizing distribution everywhere else.
To my point. Yeah, okay. I mean, completely hypothetical.
Yeah,
Uh, I would never treat a founder that way. If a founder has figured out distribution and the product is mediocre or the product is actually a service, it speaks so much more to the power of the company. You can almost see it in the gross margin, right? So consider this. If you have 10% gross margin
hmm,
and you have 9% contribution margin after, let's say, the cost of logistics to delivering the service or the product, marketing and sales. What would
sure.
that tell you, Shub?
It would tell me that you don't need to spend too much to serve the customer and to complete the transaction. And therefore, the product or service you're providing uh, is probably has some good momentum in moving itself in the market.
Bonus question, what would be
Hmm.
the EBITDA that you would expect under such a P&L? 10% gross margin, 9% contribution margin. What do you think the EBITDA would be?
So it's a tricky question because it also depends on if there's any claims being made on, hey, how much OpEx we need to invest for growth or whatever, some other fancy stuff. But I would say if you are at a 9% contribution margin, I would say you should be aiming for 2 to 4% EBITDA margin.
I would think you
Yeah.
could actually, of course, everything will depend on the model. And I'm creating a hypothetical example. I would actually be shocked if you couldn't be at 5% EBITDA margin
Yeah.
or larger.
Yeah.
And here's the reason why I say that and why I choose these numbers. So 10% gross margin means that the product that you deliver does have value for your customers, but
Hmm.
it's not the product in and of itself is not hyper differentiated. I can get the same product or I can get a similar product delivering me the same outcome at a different place.
Hmm.
But the 9% contribution margin below that means you're absolutely killing it at distributing it, which is the secret to scale.
Yeah.
Because it means I can sell the 10% gross margin infinitely often almost infinitely often because I've completely figured out the distribution. And now the beautiful thing why I came up with the EBITDA question is if I have a 10% margin product
Hmm.
and it's not hyper differentiated, it very likely means that I'm not going to invest a lot into the product.
Yes.
So the cost items below the contribution margin will actually be relatively slim, typically,
Hmm.
right? So flip that around into a software as a service business. So typically, I mean, Autodesk has 90%, 92% gross margin, fantastic.
Yeah.
Most SaaS companies would aim for 85% and be happy with 80%
Yeah.
gross margin, but it requires a ton of R&D to do that,
Yeah.
unless you're buying the GitHub Copilot hype, right? But
Hmm.
in the end, I'm personally not buying the bullshit of, hey, software engineer is the new journalist of the 1990s. I'm not buying that at all.
Yeah.
But so you're going to invest a lot into your product, which means that you're going to have a ton of cost items below your contribution margin. So in order to make from 85% to the same 5% EBITDA, the difference that will define whether you can do the 5% EBITDA is not going to be in your overhead. It's going to be where, Shub? It's going to be in your distribution.
Yeah.
So that will define
Correct.
whether you can truly generate scale. People think of SaaS as, well, I can infinitely, like the Gutenberg Bible, I can
Hmm.
infinitely print it, and that's why I'm going to be profitable. No, You will be profitable if you can infinitely distribute it.
Yeah,
That's the Gutenberg Bible. If I just print it infinitely and put it on my yard and have it lying around, I will still not make money. I might
correct.
have just had a cheap way of producing it, but if people don't get and come and pick it up from my yard, it's not going to happen. And software is the exact same thing. And because I have to invest so much in my printing machine, for me to keep printing software, it's so important to actually nail the distribution motion. And it's unbelievable, Shub, how rarely I get a founder actually talk to me about the distribution motion in a way that it's the secret skill.
Yeah, I think that is very, very rare. Although, I'm holding out hope. I think there's actually more founders who want to say that, but I think they believe it's not a cool thing to say.
Yeah.
And hopefully, that will change ever so
And I want
slightly.
to. So here's another anecdote. I want to tie it to the previous point of don't listen to junior investors employed at big generic brands who typically 364 days of the year look at another vertical. So
Hmm.
one of our best companies, one of our best companies from a 2023 investment, which is growing like it's completely blowing up. It's growing like crazy. Is in
Hmm.
the financial services space, founded by founders that understand construction, that understand contractors, that understand projects, and that understand underwriting, risk, insurance in B2B, etc. Fantastic team, growing really fast. One of the and they are a team that is nailing distribution.
Hmm.
One of the distribution hacks that they have implemented is an agent network that,
Okay.
under certain structures that they have found, which I don't want to disclose here, suffice to say they have nailed the details of that. It's hyper scalable and it meets the customers where they want. It's super fast sales, closing within 7 days. One of the most revered VC brands, junior investor, not so junior actually. I think she's a principal, looks into our space every few days a year, tells these founders that their distribution motion is not what they like. They are
Hmm.
more used to more regular distribution motions, and they would tell them, hey, you should do a different distribution motion.
Hmm.
And really, I'm sitting there. I'm glad these founders are super mature. They basically called me and laughed about it.
Hmm.
But if you're a younger founder, a founder that is still looking up to whatever certain brands, you're now going to make a mistake by
Yeah,
following that advice. And unfortunately, it happens, and it happens a lot in the realm of distribution.
absolutely. Yeah.
So,
I
do you
mean,
have another juicy fail?
I mean, I don't know if you consider it juicy. I think the other thing coming to my mind is spreading yourself too thin too soon. And what I mean by that is trying to enter too many categories, too many different value propositions or products or maybe geographies too early because it's kind of like a continuation of my earlier point where you think you're doing all this to expand the TAM, and this is not to say we are not fans of that. I think we absolutely are. But again, there's a natural progression to be followed. You can also be dividing yourself up too thin too early in the journey.
Do you think
And I
that's
think that's,
is that again a bad habit that the VC industry is kind of
I think
inheriting?
so. I think so. I think it comes from um, what's the adage? Break things, fail fast, or something along those lines.
Yeah.
Probably just to see, hey,
Break things and fail fast. Yeah.
break things and fail fast. So the idea is, hey, keep trying different categories and see what works. Keep iterating. But I think in construction, for better or worse, it doesn't actually magnify your chances of either success or to find other avenues of success, simply because I think it kind of dilutes and divides up your track record. If you're doing all this in an earlier part of your journey.
I have a hunch that this specific type of perhaps investor pressure to move into new markets quickly happens a little bit more often when you have investors on board. I speak of persons now, not of the brands or the firms. When you have investors on board whose personal career progression depends on your next round.
Yes.
because they will have an incentive to make sure that the next round happens big, happens quickly. And that means that they will anticipate through background discussions, hey, what will be called sort of the issue items? And then when you do that, the next investor that you would like on board, who hasn't spoken to the team, who hasn't seen the deck, who hasn't seen a data room, will have to make certain assumptions of what they think, they would have to see. And one of the responses then would be, well, perhaps I want to make sure that they can not only win in their home market, but also in another market. And then this person will, okay, let's prove that, etc. So it happens in the absence of, real information or an exchange of real information. So I guess that's another. So this one I wouldn't call a mistake because there are great employed investors out there, but I would say it's a mistake not to be cautious about it and not to be diligencing that person that you bring on board, because incentives drive behavior.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Great. I feel like we could keep going on and on. I think if we reduce down to specific anecdotes or even borrow from stuff we've said in previous episodes, I think we could easily double the set of points you've discussed today. But I think nevertheless it was a good, interesting set of points. Made me go back in time as well.
You and I have said, well, when we retired, hopefully that's not too soon, but when we retired, we'll write the book on VC. It will for sure be a banger to read.
I think so. In fact, I'm quite sure it will be. Yeah.
But by that time, I really hope that AI has replaced VC.
Oh, dude, we are a persistent bunch. We're not going to hand over the baton. We're not going to hand over that baton that easily, man.
Oh, don't count me into that, man. That's I think founders deserve better in many ways than the VC industry.
Yeah, but we really like the sound of our own voice as VCs.
But hey, fortunately it's actually the VC industry makes it really easy for someone to differentiate just by being a little bit more thoughtful, a little bit more specialized, a little bit more honest, a little bit more transparent, and a little bit more humble. So
and we are none of those, right?
Okay. Oh man, if we keep going now, we better write that book quickly.
Yes.
So our little ritual here, Shub, looking into the calendar, anything that excites you in your next week?
So I think continuing to be excited about two opportunities / themes I'd spoken about in the last episode. As a recap, it's something around the 3D design stack, piece of automation of around services that have been taken for granted as services in that stack, as well as a play around, let's say, the electrification of everything, that sort of thing, the availability of minerals to support that drive. I think those two opportunities continue to be very interesting. There's another one I'm looking into, which kind of typifies what we discussed in our episode on service as a product. So I'm eager to find out how a company from the ground up, how it envisions that sort of value proposition in AEC.
Love it. Especially from the ground up part, like something that builds from day one on that principle.
Exactly. Yeah.
Love it. So in case you didn't notice, I really like my home office.
Yeah.
Regular viewers might have noticed. So this is my home. So I'm looking forward to actually, this is a first for me. I have invited a founder team into my home to do a workshop with me. So
nice.
they're coming over. My wife was mediocrely thrilled. But I brought her around. Onto it.
Well done. Well done to both of you.
Yeah. So looking forward to that experience. It's going to be fun.
Awesome.
Great. Well, thanks for your time, Shub.
Terrific. See you again the next time.
See you. Ciao.